So we said it at the top of the show. Welcome to the Bo Show. This is going to be Linux hardware, kernel module, deep dive, and stuff. And so, Bo, why are we talking about all this stuff this week?
So, in preparation for my exam, I am trying to basically, it's public on the LPIC website, all the different sections that are important to the exam. And I was thinking that I wanted to kind of go through, maybe not every section, but the key sections, and do a Linux innards section or Linux innards section, a segment on it, for two reasons. One, if anybody else out there is looking to take the test, then this may be useful to them. But that's not my main goal. My main goal is for the second reason, and that is that me having to type this out and talk about it to you guys is forcing me to actually make sure that I have a good understanding of it. So I wanted to present to you my notes on the hardware section. And this all has to do with Linux hardware and kernel modules, and different commands that you might use to look at what modules are loaded and, all those sorts of things. And this will help me to bounce it off of you guys. You guys can correct me where I have a misunderstanding, and it will just solidify my understanding of it so that whenever I walk into the exam day, I'll feel comfortable doing it.
Awesome. I'm down for this.
All right. So my first note here has to do with the dmesg command, which my understanding of the dmesg command is generally whenever you start up your computer, and if you're running an OS that actually reveals the initialization process, a lot of them cover it with splash screen now, but all of those steps that's happening as your computer boots, where it's saying that this hardware is being initialized by the kernel, all of these steps in this process, whenever you run the dmesg command, basically it's revealing those steps.
And that is definitely my experience on dmesg. And it turns out dmesg is really good, I think, overall. Just simply because if you ever want to know what's going on with your hardware or why this particular device didn't come up, dmesg is going to give you everything. It's going to say, this is the name of the hardware, and here's why it didn't come up, and we tried it 4 times, and it didn't work, and on and on and on. So, right. Worst case scenario, you can take that to a website and post that, and someone can help you out with it.
This is how you find out which of your drivers didn't load.
Mm-hmm. A practical example of this is I use, anytime I'm configuring Cisco switches or routers, you got to use a console cable. And, most modern laptops don't have that 9-pin DIN serial port anymore. So it makes it really hard to use. We've got like 100 of these cables, and it really makes it really hard to do that without some kind of weird adapter. But even if you get an adapter, what do you think that adapter plugs into? USB. So we just bought USB versions of the thing, so we didn't have to mess around with the adapter. But you plug in the USB straight into the console or into your laptop, and in the dmesg console, you get told exactly which USB device was created for the thing that you plugged in, and you can take that straight to Minicom and use Minicom to start yourself a terminal and start hacking away at your Cisco switches and routers. So just something off the top of the head that I was thinking about. This affected me last week. So dmesg is fantastic for that.
So go ahead, Joe.
I included this in your number 2 section, but I'm going to say here with the dmesg, pipe and grep are your friend.
Ah, yes. That's actually what I was about to bring up. So I don't know if we'll be able to post this on the. I don't know what I'm gonna do with this video, but I'm doing a screen recording right now as we're talking about this, and I did a dmesg pipe less so that I could look at it in the less command. And if I do a search for the word error, I can see that I actually have a lot of errors in my dmesg. And it is saying that ACPI error AE already exists during yada yada yada. So it's giving me some error that it wasn't able to read some object that my BIOS recognizes, but for some reason the kernel doesn't like it. So if you were having a problem with something, then you could pipe it into less and do a search for whatever device it was, Bluetooth or in your case your USB device, and theoretically you should see an error message here, or if you do see an error message here, then that is that's a surefire sign that that's a good place to start looking.
Is yours trying to load your graphics driver twice or something?
It could be. This is my laptop, so I'm not exactly sure.
Hybrid graphics.
It does have the hybrid graphics.
There's probably a conflict between the APU and the GPU.
And also notice the numbers on the left column. I'm not sure if this is important to the exam, but I know that is basically the seconds since the computer's powered on. So it does so many messages within a second that it has it broke down and even to milliseconds. But that's what the very first column is in the dmessage command.
I don't think it's part of the test, but it is since the kernel took over, because these dmessage things come from the kernel.
Oh, right. Good point. And then a similar command, but for systemd, it's a systemd utility. And there's a whole other section on systemd, so I'm sure that there'll be a lot of systemd related topics that I'll do in another video. Yeah. But a similar command is journalctl. Journalctl is it's similar to dmessage, but it shows all the journal D entries from systemd. So this includes things after your computer's booted. So it's not just the initialization process during boot, but in the same way you could do a journalctl. You can still use pipe and grep to find different entries in the printout that it gives you.
If you know roughly what you're searching for, if it's an error or if it's a specific driver set, then you can search for that. But even if you know the rough time that something has happened, you can do a grep and search through specific minutes, and that can help you find something if you know roughly when it happened.
Yeah, and on top of that, journalctl actually has an option for that. I believe it's like since and then until. So you have to give it the actual like day and time and everything. But yeah, I mean, if you have a rough idea, just give it like the hour prior and the hour after, and then it will really pare down your log so that you don't have to spend all your time scroll. Right. I mean, like, this is Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday. Let's just pare it down to Tuesday. You can do stuff like that.
Or force it to output to a file, and then that can make it a whole lot easier to search that specific section of file.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, grep, you have to rerun a bunch, but I mean, Control F, you could just do it on the fly, which is really nice. But another thing about journalctl is that since we were talking about dmessage, you can actually get dmessage messages through journalctl. You can do journalctl space -- dmessage or -k. So one or the other. The only downside of that is dmessage actually colorizes the hardware bit and the seconds, and then the message itself is in white. Well, is in whatever the typical text is for your terminal. But one last thing about journalctl is that my favorite pair of options is X and E. So journalctl space -xe, and E will put you to the end of the journal. And because a lot of times when you're running journalctl, you want to know like what just happened. Oh my God, what just happened? So you can give it -e. And -x, I always forget what it actually stands for, but I always remember it as extra information. So -e will put you at the bottom of the thing, at the bottom of your log, and then X will give you an explanation of things that need more explanation. So it'll actually give you helpful tips. It will tell you where to go and look if you are unsure about what's going on. Journalctl XE has saved my bacon so many times just simply because Linux is helpful. It's darn helpful if you actually know how to ask it help.
So I just ran the journalctl -xe and the journalctl -e just to compare the two, what's different. And yes, with the X, there is like extra little tidbits of information. And it just looks like it's just details on when things are starting starting to run and when they're stopping, and it even gives you, like this one says that I can go to ubuntu.com/support for this particular module. So it's just got like extra details. For me, it's color coded. Right now, I see bright red errors that my CPU has been throttled because of temperature.
Whoops.
That's probably because my podcast table has a cloth top on it to keep from tapping the table and hearing it. So that's probably my problem there. But it also says that it went back to normal whenever the temperature drops. So I guess that's something I need to pay attention to. So that's Journalctl. I did the dash commands as you talked about them, Leo. So this is showing us kernel modules, or this is showing us events. Journalctl specifically is showing us system or journal D entries specifically. But these entries often relate to when the kernel discovers a module or loads a module, and that's what's useful about this information. So that brings us to kernel modules. Sorry, I was trying to segue to kernel modules, and that was not very smooth. So it's kind of like drivers. It's the instructions, how your kernel is able to use a particular piece of hardware. And there is a command lsmod that will list the modules. Now I have a question for you guys about this command. Is this listing all kernel modules that my system is aware of, or is it only listing those that are loaded, or is it maybe listing all of them and showing me which ones are loaded?
As far as I know, it is all of them, and then there's a column at the right-hand side that tells you exactly whether or not they are loaded or not. If there's a 0 there, it is not loaded. If there is a number there, it is loaded for those number of things, and then further to the right, it tells you exactly why they were loaded. So if I'm looking at E1000E is actually a LAN adapter, and I don't actually have one installed, so it's got a 0 there. And then with video, I have a video kernel driver enabled with a 2, and it's using ThinkPad_ACPI and i915. So those are my video modules that I'm actually using to drive video. So as far as I understand, it's both.
Okay, yeah.
It shows all the things.
Looking at it now, as you're describing that, I definitely can see that. Now, I do see that, like some things, like MEI, that kernel module is loaded with a 3 out beside it, but it only has 2 items listed in the farthest column. So I think that
interesting.
Yeah, most other ones are just as you said, like XOR. There's only 1, and it's being loaded by ButterFS. Most of them match up.
HCI shows it's used by 4 things, but then it doesn't list any of them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, MEI_me has a 1, but there's nothing listed in the right column. So I think you're right about I think that's the number of times that it's loaded, but I don't necessarily know that necessarily means that these are all the things. I don't know. I'm confused by the right column.
Yeah, there's got to be more, because I'm starting to see all that now. Under DRM, it says 9. Let's see, is DRM KMS helper, and then I915. Huh, interesting. So time to dig.
Yeah, there's 8 things for DRM. For me, anyway. Anyway. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Now, all of these commands that you're listening here in this kernel module section are actually really useful when you're using obscure hardware, or if you're setting up a Windows tablet as a Linux tablet, you will use these commands.
Oh yeah, I bet, because there's all sorts of different drivers and things, and that.
Right, finding out what hardware you're using and then what module you need to add, or what is listed as a USB device as opposed to a PCI device, and things like that.
Yeah, I can imagine that in all your experimentation and work that you've done there, you've had to use that. So that's lsmod. So lspci is a similar thing. It lists PCI devices, and lsusb does USB devices. And just like the previous commands we've discussed, if you needed to search for a certain thing, then you could use pipe or grep to put it into less or to grep for something. These lists are usually shorter because you don't have as many things plugged into your USB. But let me just run some examples of those for my screen capture.
Well, while you're doing that, just know that lspci and lsusb will display the hardware that you plugged into your machine regardless of whether or not the hardware is working. So it actually reads off of the hardware device to give you a name and like a revision of that hardware and all of that other kind of stuff, as well as the order in which it was loaded. So those come in really, really handy when you're trying to troubleshoot, like, oh, I just plugged in this USB thing, but it's not working, or I don't know how to find it, or whatever. But the really interesting thing about that is that you can just copy paste the name of that device into Google or whatever, and there's a good chance that you'll find some information about it. Or, throw Linux on the end of that, and betcha anything, someone else has had the same issue.
Now, something that you probably won't find useful for the test, but other people would probably find useful for finding devices, is the command amixer, which gives you all of your audio devices.
Okay, yeah, I just ran that over here.
Yeah, this is what Moss was using earlier to fix his mute button.
That's right. Yesterday we were discussing that.
Mm-hmm.
So amixer, is that part of a ALSA?
Also.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. So we also have modprobe. Modprobe is what you would use to load kernel modules. So if you needed to load a specific module and you knew the name of the module, you could say modprobe space and then the name of the module, and it will attempt to load it. rmmod, I'm assuming, is the opposite. It removes modules or it disables them. What's the distinction there, Leo?
Now that one I'm not sure, because most of the time if I'm trying to remove a module, I'll use modprobe-r, and that will remove the module from currently running. I wonder if rmmod will remove it from the list altogether.
Yeah, I'm looking it up now just to get the distinction, because you are right. Modprobe-r basically does what you said, and rmmod, it just says it's a simple program to remove a module from the Linux kernel. So yeah, I think it removes it from your list altogether.
Yeah, it's a little more permanent than it sounds like, because if you do modprobe-r, because actually I had an issue with my trackpad, I had to fix that by modprobe-r ps mouse and then reloading it. So if you do modprobe-r whatever and then reboot, that module will come back in. So it sounds like rmmod is the more permanent way to delete that or to get rid of that particular module.
So their man page says rmmod is a trivial program to remove a module from the kernel. Most users will want to use modprobe with the -r option instead.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, that gives credence to what we're talking about then. Good.
And
that's the Unix way though, isn't it?
Yeah.
You write an entire program just to do one thing, and that's it.